This is the story of how I caught my wife cheating in a car, and my revenge didn't wait. I had been planning the surprise for weeks. Our 10th wedding anniversary was approaching, and despite the distance that had crept into our relationship over the past few months, I wanted to remind Lauren of the life we'd built together. I told myself that work stress had caused her mood swings and her increasing absences, that the spark would reignite if I made the effort. I'd arranged to leave work early on our anniversary. I picked up a bouquet of her favorite flowers, pale pink roses, and a necklace I knew she'd love. As I drove to her office, I rehearsed what I'd say, imagining the look of delight on her face when she saw me standing there, waiting for her. But as I pulled into the parking lot, something felt off. Lauren's car was parked in the far corner, away from the usual employee spots. That alone might not have meant much, but as I parked and stepped out of my car, I noticed it. Her car was moving. At first, it was subtle, just a faint rocking motion, like someone shifting inside. Then it became more obvious, an unmistakable rhythm. My chest tightened as a million rational explanations raced through my mind, each more ridiculous than the last. Maybe she was reaching for something in the back seat. Maybe she'd dropped something. I walked closer, my feet heavy, my breath quickening. The windows were fogged up. My hands began to shake as I moved to a vantage point where I could see inside. That's when I saw it. Through the condensation on the rear window, I could make out the blurry silhouette of a man's back. His shirt was off, his muscles tensing and relaxing in a steady rhythm. Beneath him was Lauren. Her face was partially visible, her head tilted back, her eyes closed, her mouth slightly open. She looked enraptured. A cold wave of nausea hit me and my vision blurred. It felt like the ground beneath me had disappeared, leaving me weightless and unmoored. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears, and my breathing became shallow. For a moment, I thought I might collapse. I stumbled back, leaning against a nearby car for support. I couldn't think, couldn't process what I was seeing. The woman I had spent a decade building a life with was in the back seat of her car, completely oblivious to the world around her, lost in the arms of another man. Anger surged through me, hot and blinding. I clenched my fists, every fiber of my being screaming at me to storm over, to yank open the door and confront them. But somewhere in the chaos of my mind, a quieter voice prevailed. Don't act in the heat of the moment. Don't let your anger control you. I fumbled for my phone, my hands trembling so badly it took several tries to unlock it. I raised it and snapped a few photos. The images were shaky, but they captured enough. The fogged up windows, the man's back, Lauren's unmistakable face, proof. My legs felt like lead as I turned and walked away. I forced myself to keep moving, one step at a time, until I was back in my car. I got in, shut the door, and sat there, staring blankly at the dashboard. My mind was racing. But it was all noise. No coherent thoughts, just a swirling mess of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak. I didn't remember starting the engine or driving away. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in a bar a few miles from home, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of me. The bartender gave me a sympathetic look as I ordered it another, then another. The alcohol dulled the edges of my pain, but did nothing to erase the images burned into my mind. Lauren's face, her expression of pure pleasure. The way her hands gripped the man's shoulders. It replayed over and over like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I don't remember how long I stayed at the bar or how I got home that night. When I woke up the next morning, my head throbbed and my mouth felt like sandpaper. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional weight pressing down on me. Lying there in bed, staring at the ceiling, I replayed the events of the previous day. The disbelief, the anger, the crushing realization that everything I thought I knew about my marriage had been a lie. But as the fog of alcohol lifted, another feeling began to take hold. Determination. I wasn't going to confront Lauren in a drunken rage. I wasn't going to let my emotions dictate my actions. If she had been capable of betraying me so completely, then I needed to be just as calculating, just as cold. Lauren was still asleep when I got out of bed and quietly left the house. I drove to an electronics store across town and bought a set of hidden cameras. Small, discreet, and easy to install. When I got back home, I set to work. I installed the first camera in the living room, concealed among the books on a shelf. The second went in the kitchen, hidden behind a decorative plant. The third and final camera I placed in her home office, tucked away in a corner where it had a clear view of her desk. By the time I finished, my hands were steady, my mind clear. I didn't know what I would find, but I was determined to gather the evidence I needed before making my next move. Lauren woke up a few hours later, acting as if nothing was wrong. She greeted me with a smile, kissed my cheek, and asked if I wanted coffee. I nodded, forcing myself to act normal, even as my stomach churned. I wondered if she had any idea that I knew. Did she feel guilty? Or was she so confident in her deception that it didn't even cross her mind? As I watched her pour coffee and chat about her plans for the day, I realized something. I didn't recognize her anymore. The woman standing in front of me, so poised, so charming, it was all a facade, and I was determined to tear it down. For the next several days, I played the role of the oblivious husband. I acted as though nothing had changed, as though I hadn't seen Lauren's betrayal with my own eyes. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Every time I looked at her, I felt the anger bubbling under the surface, threatening to spill over. But I knew I had to keep my composure. If she suspected that I knew, she might change her behavior, cover her tracks, or worse, twist the situation to make me look like the bad guy. I couldn't afford that. The hidden cameras were my lifeline. Each evening after Lauren went to bed, I'd retrieve the footage from the devices and watch it on my laptop. Most nights, there was nothing, just her scrolling through her phone, cooking dinner, or talking to Josh, our 8-year-old son. Then, on the fourth day, I hit pay dirt. I had just clicked into the recording from her home office camera when I noticed her on the phone. She was pacing back and forth, her voice low but clear. "I can't stop thinking about it," she said, her tone laced with excitement. My stomach turned. "Yeah, I'll make an excuse," she continued. "He's clueless. He doesn't suspect a thing." She laughed softly, and I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. "Next week works," she said. "Same place, or maybe that we could try somewhere new. I'll figure it out." She ended the call a few moments later, a dreamy smile on her face as she sat down at her desk and started typing. I paused the footage, my jaw tightening. This was it. Proof that she wasn't just indulging in a one-time mistake. This was ongoing. She had a routine, plans, a damn schedule. I didn't sleep that night. My mind raced with questions, scenarios, and plans. But one thing was clear. I needed more. And the next day I installed an additional camera outside, positioned to capture anyone who came to the house. Lauren had been staying late at work most evenings, but I had a hunch she'd eventually feel bold enough to bring him here. I didn't have to wait long. 2 days later, while I was at work, I got a notification from the camera app on my phone. Someone had entered the house. I opened the live feed and felt a surge of vindication and fury all at once. It was him, the same man I'd seen in her car that day, tall, broad-shouldered, with a confident swagger that made me want to punch him through the screen. Lauren greeted him at the door, pulling him inside with a smile that was meant to be mine. I immediately switched to the camera inside the living room. They didn't even bother with pretense. As soon as the door closed, they were all over each other, their hands wandering, their lips locked. I forced myself to keep watching, my anger and disgust mounting with every passing second. They moved from the living room to the kitchen, then upstairs. By the time they reached her office, I was trembling with rage. I fast-forwarded through the footage, unable to stomach watching the details. When they finally left the office, hours later, Lauren looked flushed and radiant. He kissed her goodbye at the door like it was the most natural thing in the world. I downloaded the footage, saving it to a secure drive. This was all I needed. But I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. That night, I pretended to be exhausted from work. I mumbled through dinner, barely making eye contact with Lauren, who seemed oblivious to the tension radiating off me. Josh chatted away about school, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing under the surface. After dinner, Lauren disappeared into her office, and I seized the opportunity to prepare for the next phase of my plan. I spent the next week gathering every piece of evidence I could find. I scoured our shared bank account and found charges I hadn't noticed before. Hotel stays, expensive dinners, and even lingerie I'd never seen her wear. I took screenshots of her call logs, saved emails, and added them to my growing collection of evidence. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer audacity. Lauren wasn't just having an affair. She was doing it right under my nose, using my money and assuming I was too stupid to catch on. By the time the week was over, I had enough evidence to blow her world apart, but I wasn't going to do it quietly. 2 weeks after I'd seen them together in her car, Lauren made the mistake of leaving her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. She was upstairs, probably freshening up for another work meeting, and Josh was playing in his room. I couldn't resist. I picked up the phone and opened her messages. There he was, saved under a fake name, Linda, but unmistakably him. Their conversation made my stomach churn. Can't wait for tonight. Wear that red dress. You better make it worth my while. You know I always do. I scrolled through weeks of messages, my anger boiling over with each flirtatious exchange. Lauren's footsteps on the stairs snapped me out of it. I quickly put the phone back where I'd found it and left the kitchen, my mind racing. That night after she left, I opened my laptop and drafted an email. It was short, to the point, and addressed to her company's HR department. I attached a few choice photos and videos. Along with a detailed explanation of her relationship with her colleague, I hit send, my heart pounding. The fallout was swift. The next day, Lauren came home early, her face pale and tight with anger. She barely looked at me as she stormed into her office, slamming the door behind her. I could hear muffled shouting as she made frantic phone calls, but I didn't need to eavesdrop to know what was happening. By the end of the week, her lover had been fired, and Lauren had been placed on probation. Her reputation at work was in tatters, and the tension at home was palpable. She still didn't know I was behind it. Not yet. The days following the email to her company were a whirlwind of tension. Lauren was like a storm cloud hovering over the house, her anger barely contained. She avoided me as much as possible, staying locked in her office or going out for hours without explanation. Josh, thankfully, seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of hostility. I worked hard to keep things normal for him, masking the chaos that was about to unfold. Lauren didn't confront me about the email, at least not at first, but I could see the suspicion in her eyes whenever we crossed paths. She was putting the pieces together, though she didn't yet have the courage or the evidence to accuse me outright. I didn't mind. It gave me more time to prepare. The moment of reckoning came one Saturday morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, reading the news on my phone, when Lauren came downstairs. She was dressed casually, yoga pants, a loose sweater, but her face was tight with barely concealed rage. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Did you have something to do with this?" she demanded, slamming her phone down on the table in front of me. I didn't need to look at the screen to know what she was talking about. "Something to do with what?" I asked calmly, taking a sip of my coffee. "Don't play dumb, Jack," she snapped. "Someone sent HR an email about me, about personal things." Her voice faltered slightly on the last part, but she recovered quickly. "Now they're watching my every move. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is?" I set my mug down and looked her straight in the eye. "Humiliating? You mean like catching your wife in the backseat of her car with another man? Is that the kind of humiliation we're talking about?" Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time in weeks, she was speechless. "Like I've known for a while now, Lauren," I continued, my tone steady. "I saw you that day at your office. I've seen you with him here in our house. I've read your messages, seen your bank statements. I know everything." The color drained from her face. She took a step back, her hands trembling. "Jack, Don't," I said sharply, cutting her off. "Don't insult me with excuses or fake apologies. You made your choices, and now you're going to face the consequences." Her eyes narrowed, the fear replaced by anger. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Sending that email, ruining my career, but you've only made things worse for yourself. If you think I'm going to roll over and let you take everything, you're delusional." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Take everything? Lauren, I don't want everything. I just want my freedom. And I want Josh to be safe from all of this." She scoffed, shaking her head. "Safe? Don't make me laugh. You're going to drag him through a messy divorce because you can't handle the fact that I needed more than what you could give me?" Her words stung, but I refused to let her see it. "Messy?" I said with a bitter smile. "The only one who's going to end up in a mess here is you. I have everything I need to make sure of that." I stood, pushing my chair back slowly. "I've already spoken to a lawyer, I've filed for divorce, and you'll be served the papers soon enough. And just so you know, I've got enough evidence to make sure you walk away with as little as possible." Lauren's face twisted with rage. "You bastard," she hissed. "Call me what you want," I replied, walking past her toward the stairs. Just make sure you're out of the house by the end of the month. Lauren didn't take the news well. The next few weeks were filled with arguments, accusations, and thinly veiled threats. She tried to weaponize everything. Josh, our shared finances, even her reputation. She threatened to drag my name through the mud, to paint me as the villain, the inattentive husband who drove her into another man's arms. But every time she tried to pull a card, I countered with evidence. When she accused me of being neglectful, I showed my lawyer the videos of her secret meetings. When she claimed I was trying to alienate her from Josh, I presented the receipts for the time and effort I spent maintaining stability for him while she pursued her affair. By the time we went to court, her case was in shambles. The judge granted me primary custody of Josh, citing Lauren's unstable behavior and the evidence of her affair. She was allowed supervised visitation, but was ordered to leave the house. Her demands for alimony were denied, thanks to the detailed financial records I'd provided, showing how she had used our shared funds to support her infidelity. The final blow came when her company officially terminated her employment. The HR investigation I'd sparked uncovered more than just her affair. It revealed a pattern of inappropriate behavior with multiple colleagues. Her professional reputation was destroyed. The day she packed her things and left was oddly quiet. There was no shouting, no last-ditch attempts to change my mind. She barely looked at me as she loaded her suitcases into the car. When she finally drove away, I stood in the doorway for a long time, staring at the empty street. Josh came up behind me, tugging on my sleeve. "Is Mom coming back?" he asked, his voice small. I knelt down, putting my hands on his shoulders. "She'll still see you, buddy," I said gently. "But things are going to be different now. It's just going to be the two of us for a while." "Okay," he said after a moment, and his face thoughtful. "I think I like it better this way." His words hit me harder than anything Lauren had said over the past few months. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as the weight of everything finally began to lift. The weeks that followed were surprisingly peaceful. Without Lauren's constant presence, the house felt lighter. I focused on building a new routine for Josh and me. School, soccer practice, and quiet evenings spent watching movies or playing games. One evening, as we sat on the couch, Josh looked up at me and smiled. "You're happier now, Dad," he said simply. I smiled back, ruffling his hair. "Yeah, buddy, I think I am." And for the first time in a long time, I truly believed it. Months passed, and life became peaceful. Lauren faded into the background, her attempts at contact growing less frequent as Josh and I thrived in our new routine. Without her chaos, the house felt lighter, freer. A place of comfort and healing. Josh, perceptive as ever, seemed happier. "I like our life now, Dad," he told me one evening, his smile bright and genuine. I looked at him, the weight of the past finally lifting. "So do I, buddy," I said. We were free. The end.